stakeholders are working with national institutions to defend their interests and to generate rules that facilitate safe international trade. We've also engaged and succeeded in encouraging South-South cooperation so that countries can work together to develop their capacities and adopt good practices while promoting communication and collaboration between neighbors. And with that, the important work of the government of Costa Rica and the government of Chile during the years of Director General Villalobos' administration has been critical. And I thank the leaders of both countries who are here. Michelle is here from Chile, and the representative from Costa Rica is in the back as well and is visiting. So we thank them for their leadership. I think to conclude, I'll have a number of ICA-related accomplishments in working with you, but I think I would like to now turn the table over to Dr. Guillermo Antonio da Costa, the chairperson of the Codex Alimentarius. Please, Dr. Acosta.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. My friend Lloyd, thanks so much for your kind introduction. Dear Director General Emeritus Victor Villalobos, a good friend for many years, and my friend Michelle Leporati, coordinator of the FAO WHO Committee for the Latin American Caribbean region, and our colleague Grant Wilson from the Canadian government. It's a great pleasure to be here before so many ministries and government authorities. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to you and to take part for the first time in a meeting of the Inter-American Board of Agriculture and represent the Commission, the Codex Alimentarius Commission, as chairperson. I wanted to commend you, Victor, for the excellent performance of ICA these past few years. And since the member states are all participating with Codex Alimentarius, and I want to highlight the terrific work that has been done and regional coordination through CHIPIA, coordinated in Chile, coordinated by Michelle. Since yesterday, I've been learning alongside of you, and for the next few minutes, I'm going to speak about the importance of Codex Alimentarius to agriculture and trade. It's important to, when we refer to the importance of Codex Alimentarius within our hemisphere and our culture and trade, we have to look at the international context. We must keep in mind a question that was that has been mentioned since yesterday by ministers, by others. How are we going to face the Herculean task of feeding 9 billion people by 2050? How can we do that in a manner that's strategic and planned? Codex must face various aspects considered to be challenges with regards to food safety. For example, there's an increasing demand for food, and it's based on finite sources, and we also have a very complex food supply chain, and they pose various challenges to an organization that has to make many efforts for public health. For addressing public health issues. I was in Senegal in Africa, and I remember I was at a hotel there, and I was working in the room, and then suddenly I ordered lunch. I ordered a salmon lunch, and it seemed that the salmon in my sandwich had been fished an hour ago. I was impressed with the aspect of the salmon. Perhaps the salmon hadn't been produced in Africa. The salmon was from Norway, obviously, or Chile, or somewhere else, probably Europe. So I was thinking, that salmon was fished. He had to be, the fish had to be kept frozen and then gutted and filleted. The fillets were packaged, and that flew from one continent to another continent. It was distributed, and it seemed that the fish had this sense. The aspect was as if it were fresh fish yesterday. So that's a challenge that we face with this complex food supply chain. We are also dealing with an increased issues with international trade of food ingredients throughout the world, and human beings are traveling more. So at the airport, you can see that there's an enormous amount of people, and you have to look at that. These are people we have to feed. Imagine the millions of passengers that have to be fed on a daily basis. And this food has to be safe, and public health has to be taken into account. Population dietary habit changes. In my country, it would be unthinkable to serve sushi and sashimi in the cities of Brazil 20 or 25 years back. That would have been unheard of because it's a raw product, and there are microbiological hazards with that. The food has to be tested, and you have to think of those details. An organization has to reinforce trade and agriculture and safety in this regards. So the problems you can see exist. Here we see an enormous amount of people that get sick. People die as a result of foodborne diseases. And this happens every year in every country. It's a great problem. And the region has been working to address this. And it's the result, and it's very important for this effort to be backed by our government authorities, by our ministers, because we have to address these types of problems. And these problems also lead to shortcomings when they occur, and shortcomings that affect trade and agriculture. And we need policies in place to control this. Here we could see that among the main farm products or agricultural products that are exported, if we look at the first six, 4 countries in the region export them. So, of course, there are public health problems when you consume and when you trade and consume these products. But when that happens, that directly affects agriculture, and because these are farmed products, and trade, of course. So as part of this global context, you can see that the Codex Alimentaria has a very important role to play here, because it's the most important part of food safety in trade areas. So what are the benefits that are expected with regards to Codex standards? Well, enhanced international and national awareness of food safety and quality issue. Raise awareness, that is. And food quality. It's also to foster surveillance and risk analysis and manage food safety risks. on an international level to improve consumer health protection around the globe. It's expected that standards will definitely benefit member countries in protecting their public health. Proactive awareness of trade facilitation, given that these standards, that food-related standards, will lead to that, more trade facilitation. And this is directly tied to agricultural products. And a higher international effort to support domestic risk management regulations and decisions tied to risk assessment for among our member countries. For example, by harmonization of these standards. And how can we truly achieve these benefits? Well, with regards to the standards, the Codex standards, we must identify the main objectives and priorities when we develop our standards. It's also important to outline what the key activities are so that we will attain our objectives. It's also very important to emphasize collaboration, inclusiveness, consensus building, and transparency. These are 4 key aspects when we develop standards in order for them to benefit the population groups. Also stimulate dissemination, demystification, and practical application among the productive chain. This exchange of ideas is an excellent opportunity to delve a bit further about my organization and the important work it does, and speak with a very important part of this group, the decision makers, and making sure that our standards are thought about every day. When we have breakfast every morning or any meal of the day, we are directly or indirectly benefiting from the Codex Alimentarius standards of the food that we are eating. And we're also an example of practical application of these standards. I had the privilege, and this is an interesting example. When I was working for Brazil's issues, and I was in Chile, and I remember that I developed a policy or standard for salmon trade, and I remember the HACCP principles were applied as a standard, and that's something that I came up with when I was working for Brazil and Chile on Codex. But this is always a teamwork effort. Everyone has to work together, and the private sector and the public sector as well as academia. The organization has a tremendous responsibility because it has presence throughout the different countries of the world. We reach all continents, and members represent 99% of the world's population. So we have a strong presence throughout the world. And this is even more enhanced after creating the WTO, the World Trade Organization, in 1995, after the multilateral rounds in Uruguay, when the WTO agreements were drawn up. One of the agreements was the practical application of HFS measures or SPS measures. And we have reference organizations, among them the Codex Alimentarius Commission, when we deal with food safety. So before the SPS agreement, the countries could establish policies for food safety, and they did not have the obligation of scientifically proving if that policy or that guideline was required to ensure public health. After the WTO agreement and the SPS agreement, that is where Codex is mentioned as a reference organization, countries can even establish more stringent measures than those included in the Codex Alimentarius. But they have to be evidence-based, and this is subject to inspection and other organizations such as the WTO's Differences Resolution Organization. So how do we work in a strategic fashion with the organization so that its members may benefit from improved agriculture and agricultural trade? Well, we're working on this strategy, and we've been doing so arduously since the beginning of the year. After the new bureau or new after we built our new office in 20 for the 2020-2025 section, more changes will take place. I was just with Michel in Rome, and we established a proposal for regarding strategic objectives. The first one being making sure that Codex standards address members demonstrated current, emerging, and critical issues. This can be summarized by prioritizing. So we need to prioritize the work that we do. So another proposal is to develop standards that are scientific and evidence-based and based on risk analysis principles. And that can be summarized under the umbrella term science. And this is a great challenge because scientific advisory organization, JETFI, GENRA, GMPR, these are all organizations that perform the risk assessment exercises so that Codex, as a risk management organization, can elaborate its standards. So we face a tremendous challenge because there's a great need of improving the financial side of our organizations so it can meet the demand. So we need financial strengthening of the organization. Yesterday, I heard someone mentioning that other options had to be considered to improve the financial health of this organization. Well, we have to do the same with regards to the scientific side of Codex. And we met with the Director General or with the General Secretary of FAO because to address precisely this, because the standards have to be evidence-based. Also, the global use of Codex standards as visibility and awareness, it's very important for our member states to be able to use these standards. So they have to be, we have to make our organization more visible and raise awareness among the different actors of the chain, the decision makers, and stress the importance of this organization to avoid the problems seen in the past. Our strategic goal number 4, all Codex members will need to effectively engage in the work that Codex does. And I highlight the members in developed as well as least developed countries. And here we want to emphasize the committees, the Codex committees of the member states. And this influences directly in the work and the success of the work of the country, internally and externally. If a committee is well staffed, if it includes a multidisciplinary team, scientists, individuals from the private public sector, the more prepared the individuals are, the better execution of that group. And the Commission will be well prepared to defend the region, especially in multilateral settings, as is the case with the Codex. So this committee is definitely important. And in this region, we can say happily that our committees are working more proactively, but we still need the support of our ministers to be able to continue to support the work of their national committees. And that could be summarized by inclusion or inclusiveness. We need a standard that can be applied in a practical manner throughout the different countries that truly reflects the country's needs. They shouldn't be standards that are just easy to read, but hard to execute. Standards should reflect what's needed and not just focus on what's going to be the photo, the picture, what's going to be easily or nicely seen, nicely viewed. It has to be practical, not just something superficial, and that's what the standards have to reflect.
And finally, we have to continuously improve things with practical, efficient, and effective management and measures to manage the codex. It is therefore fundamental that we should have public-private partnerships. It is very important because at the end of the day, who is going to implement these standards and practically for the production of food? These are precisely the private stakeholders. So it is very important that they should be included in the development of national positions and work closely with them on the various pillars of the organization, working with them, for example, in capacity building, training, to have the private sector on board, working together with the public sector so that we can have best results in the organization, having the best results in agriculture and in trade. And of course, these truly are active stakeholders to see the problems, but they have to work closely together. So these are they're part of the solution, because when we work together, we try to find solution to problems in a far more focused manner, a more practical and a more pragmatic approach to see who exactly is going to produce the food. The government, of course, is going to have the oversight of this. We have to look at the parties, the people who, the government and the consumers are the ones who are going to benefit directly. So close collaboration between the private and public sectors is a win-win situation, and everyone will come out benefiting. I don't know no other type of practice that can give such positive results, such as a win-win strategy. And that is what we have when we have a very effective public-private partnership. And the Codex, it is no different. The private sector participates in the National Commission for Committee, in the preparing of the positions, and they try to guarantee the proper use of agricultural products as well as good commercial trade flows. So to conclude, to answer the first question that we asked ourselves, so that was, how can we feed 9 billion people in 2050? How can we do this in a strategic and planned way? Well, we think that we have to look at the important points as far as Codex is concerned so that we can do so in a planned and strategic manner. So generally, when we think about this, we immediately think of food safety. Food safety, of course, is extremely important. However, food safety, as was said yesterday, does span a whole series of elements. And from these, we have 2 elements that are basic pillars of the organization. So we can have a whole series of, we can have many foods that are enough to ensure food safety. That's all very well to have this if these foods are not safe. So these foods must come with a necessary guarantee to ensure that the consumers will not have health problems, even if we have a sufficient amount of food. And if this food is safe, if we do not have real trade practices that can facilitate the transfer from the area of production to the area of consumption, will not have safety. So these are elements that are vital for food safety. And here is where the organization can also contribute with agricultural products and with trade. So these are the elements that I just wanted to throw out to you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Da Costa. Obrigado. A continuación,
Now,
Dr. Michelle Leporati Neron, chairperson of the Codex Coordinating Committee of Latin America and the Caribbean, representing Chile. Doctor.
Buenos días.
Good morning, all. Mr. Victor Villalobos, Director General of ICA, Mr. Da Costa, Mr. Brent Wilson from Canada, Lloyd Day, Deputy Director General of ICA. Thank you all. Thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you for giving me the possibility of sharing with you a few thoughts on the importance of a Codex Alimentarius in the Latin American and Caribbean region. Before I go into my presentation, I just, of course, like to thank the Government of Canada that made this very important activity possible. I'd also like to greet very affectionately the outgoing Director General, Mr. Villalobos, and thank him for all the efforts that he has made and to ensure that ICA is connected with the whole with Codex Alimentarius. I'd also like to thank the incoming Director General and sure that he'll continue the efforts of his predecessor to ensure institutional development of Codex in the region. Having said this, and I'd just like to give you make a presentation. I hope it will be 10 minutes, but I do have a bit of time, really abiding by time with time constraints. So I think perhaps it will be 12 minutes. So first of all, I just give you a bit of the background so that we can situate the agri-food situation of the region. And as was said by Guillermo, it is very important to look at the global context. When in our region, we have to look at this. So the first thing that we have to note is, in keeping with all of what have been said, and I think more or less 40% of food production in the world today is in the Americas. We are, and somebody said this yesterday, I think, as a sort of slogan, we're the breadbasket of the world. We are the dead breadbasket. We have been and continue to be so. In fact, if you look at the latest FAO publication of its part, which is back to international trade in food, you will see that from 2015, Latin America and the Caribbean are the major exporters of food in the world. So in 2024, the net trade in agricultural products will be $60 billion. So which is talking about a region that not only produces, but also it will help, which is very important for feeding the 9 billion people in the world, which will have very soon, but it will have trade in food products. And these are these food products from all our region are present in all the markets, practically all markets of the world. So in this context, and there are some elements that are very important to understand exactly what is happening with respect to our relationship to food and how it's going to develop in the world. So Mr. J.M. Mully has said that never in the history of humanity has food been as safe as it is today. And I think that we all share this. It's a technical assessment based on science and concrete evidence. However, from this standpoint, well, there's a standpoint that says never in the history of the world have there been more concern about the safety of food and what we eat on a day-to-day basis. And this leads to some tension in the system of trade in food. We cannot have national or public policies or regional or hemisphere-wide policies if we do not consider what people are looking to at today and what is worrying and concerning people. So this has to the fact that the whole question of food safety and quality are complex and ever-changing subjects. Food dangers, dangers in food vary over time. There are chemical, biological, and physical questions, and they vary according to various factors, because sometimes, perhaps because the advance of science makes us more aware of this. So the dangers vary over time. So if they vary, the risks associated to these also vary. And of course, this is inevitable. Of course, we determine that there is a pathogen that is resistant to antibiotics. And so this pathogen that is not controlled, this if it is not controlled by antibiotics, it could present a risk for human health. So the same happened with chemical contaminants and physical contaminants. So apart from this, there's also perception. The perception of risk varies. A few years ago, people were consuming foods without major concerns on this. However, there's a great sensitivity to this question. Now that there's a global citizen concern about citizens, that is not food is not seen as something to nourish you, but to see how food can give us well-being and a quality of life today and in the future. There's a particular sensitivity to this. And of course, people look very carefully at this question all over the world. And of course, this has to do with its effects on our the quality of life and our health and our well-being. Here are a few data that show us how this perception of risk is in keeping with real data that show us how food affects people or does not affect people. The WHO said that that every year there are 600 million due from food-related illnesses. 600 million. Of this, 420,000 lead to death. And out of this, 140,000 are children below the age of 5 years. So this is a problem that has still not been resolved. It is not resolved because things are not being done. It is not resolved because it's a complex situation, which means that we have to constantly monitor it because it's a seriously evolving situation. So if we change these data into an indicator for the loss of years of useful life, we have to see how many years of life and how the living life expectancy of the population reduces. We have to see that from the 600 million of food, which was 31 millions of life due to incapacity of now, of course, questions such as obesity because of poor nutrition. As we said yesterday, this has become a major problem for farmers or those who produce and trade in food. Of course, we have many millions of deaths due to non-communicable disease because of this poor food. And if we look at the causes that have the greatest correlation is bad diet, sedentarism, and smoking. So these, of course, these are non-communicable diseases. Well, what does this mean from the point of view of food population? And it means that it has a high public and private impact from the point of view of the closure of markets, loss of production, loss of income, and unemployment, etc. This has a tremendous public and private impact because of this situation. And apart from this, we have on an ongoing basis, new emerging challenges that come to complicate and make the situation more difficult as far as food safety is concerned. So in this context, and on the basis of this background, the role of the Codex Alimentarius here is fundamental. That is, it contributes to help countries to have safe food production, healthy food production for the benefit of consumers, and to ensure the economic development of the countries that to a large extent depend on this type of activity. Codex today has 188 members, and it covers 99% of the international population with its standards, proposals, and guidelines. 219 observers, 56 NGOs, 147 intergovernmental organizations, and 16 UN agencies that participate in this assembly. It is an international assembly that deals with food safety, and it, as I said, this is Codex as it is today. It basically, as Guillermo said, trying to generate practices to ensure the safety of food for the benefit of the consumer, as well as loyal fair trading practices. To date, Codex in 2017 produced in its ongoing and everyday work 53 practical codes, 78 guidelines, and developed 1,005 standards on additives in food, has established for pesticides, 4,844 guidelines and 64 guidelines for the use of and 349 standards. And of course, it's extremely important. And this sort of action facilitates food trade in food and allows developing countries that have less possibility for developing their own standards. It gives them a possible state and possibilities for trading on an international level. On the basis of these products made by codes as far as concerns guidelines and standards and guides, they have to be based on science that is unquestionable as far as the implementation, of course. These are internationally harmonized because they facilitate trade. There are a reference for the World Trade Organization. Of course, they stimulate transparent trade. And of course, they are easily adopted at the national level. And of course, they ensure security in the implementation of public policies in the countries that adopt them. What are the benefits of all of these standards, guidelines, and guides? Is that they overcome technical barriers to trade. They minimize these. Of course, when we have they satisfy food safety standards. They generate fluidity in the interchange of trade, of products in trade. And this is very important because to have a standard, for regulation, for regulating food safety, we have to have analysis and a capacity of analysis and scientific study. It very often, developing countries in our region on an individual basis cannot carry this out by themselves due to financial difficulties, since they may have other priorities, for example, for the allocation of their resources, or perhaps because these are issues that are extraordinarily complex. So this facilitates makes it easier for us to have these regulations available to be adopted in our national policies and protect our consumers and facilitate trade in food products. So, of course, this saves time and money for countries using them. In the region, we use especially the norms concerning for pesticides, minimum residue, pesticide residues, and others. And of course, these are very important for our countries in order to ensure trade in our food products in the world. Scientific basis that lead to these standards are unquestionable. They lead to transparency, independence of those people developing them. Of course, these are adopted and agreed to by the countries and adopted universally. So what are the strengths? Of what is the advantages of having us this type of harmonized standards today? And the major strength, the major advantages for having a codex in Latin American Caribbean region is that we have a commitment to adopt these standards in our national policies and regulations. We have a national incorporation of harmonized standards, and this is a benefit to the codex as well as to the countries using these norms and standards. And there's another very important element which makes the Codex Alimentarius a very, very important. Our partner that is internal coordination and joint work on priority subjects for those countries that participate in this organization. For example, there are issues or subjects that we have had to agree on to work on together to ensure that we have coordinated action in the face of the rest of the world. And one of these has been the election of Guillermo da Costa, who is now the present coordinator and chairman. And we have this has ensured that the coordination of all the countries of the region. And this is clear evidence how the CELAC is working in the interests of the nations as well as the regions and Latin America and Caribbean as a whole. There is a very interesting process of coordination. More and more, we're seeing that as far as regional positions concerning questions on debate, we have wide-ranging agreement on interesting points of interest for our national interests. However, there are three aspects that are very important that we must work on in order to strengthen and to ensure that our action is even more effective in representing our region. The first is the institutionality, the second is participation, and the third is science in the use and development of standards, and to ensure and to see how the region contributes to this and participates in this. We talked about the region has made great strides in having national committees. We have 25 countries that have regular committees. And this is encouraging. It means that Codex is becoming more and more institutionalized in our countries, and its action is being permitted at the national level. So some countries also have to make an effort. We have to support them to ensure that this can be percolated throughout the system. And this is particularly important with respect to other regions of the world, other countries and other regions. With respect to the national subcommittees in each of our country here, we do have situations which vary rather much, and we should be more concerned about this, even though these subcommittees have been set up. Not all of the subcommittees have been set up in all of the countries, and we have to look at this. Has to do with the priorities of the individual countries, but it also has to do with financial, economic, human resources, and all the type of resources that are needed to ensure that these subcommittees work. Well, all the 18 subcommittees that we have should be present in all of the countries of the region so that each country can really follow what is being happening in the development of standards and to ensure that their interests are respected in the application of these standards. With respect to the participation, now here we have a dual situation. We have made great strides in the coverage today, and for the last 2 years, we have a presence as a region all of international meetings where we have a decision-making on questions of Codex. However, if you look at the graph, we do not all have the same number of countries present in all of these countries. And this is a structural question of the region that we're working on, but requires a major effort to ensure that we can have the necessary capacity to be present in a more visible way in all of these committees. You can see that some in some countries of the CCLAC, and in countries, in meetings in Rome or in Geneva. It is in the subcommittees where we have a discussion of the standards, but there's a great variation in the participation. On the request to scientific basis, now we have a great deficit that we have to deal with as soon as possible. One thing is that the country gives very little data for the building these standards. Therefore, the standards do not fully represent the reality of our countries. And this is a gap that is represented in the standards and something that can only be resolved if we give richer and fuller data. And the other question is that the participation of our scientists is very low in the auxiliary bodies for scientific analysis. We do have good scientists, and they must be present in the JECFA, GEMRA, and other organizations that we can participate and have the point of view of our region represented.
The third point is funcionamiento de estos organismos científicos, y es lo que decía Guillermo. There was almost no financial support for contributing to the expert committees in this region. The region has conditions in some cases to make valuable contributions to these organizations. also working through ICA. So we need to figure out how we can foster more financial support so that we would have better action by our hemisphere in actions of this kind. What are our challenges? We need more communication among the countries of the region and among the stakeholders in Codex, between Codex and the citizenship in general, between Codex and decision makers. Meetings such as this are very important. We need to consolidate participation by all the countries of the region in the international bodies. We need to strengthen our ability to take part. It's not enough just to go to the meeting. You need to take part in it, and you need to express positions that are whenever a standard is being discussed. Also, we need to improve our ability to use science in this region, as I was saying a little while ago. The tasks we need to fulfill by 2019, as we coordinate the region, have been defined as follows: institutional development and participation. We need to make better use of the resources we have in this system, and Codex does have a fund for fostering participation by countries, by the lower income countries, but it's not enough to guarantee participation by all the countries. So we are working here with international cooperation, triangular cooperation, South-South cooperation, in order to obtain more resources so that we can facilitate participation. Here in the region, there are countries that could provide funding to the trust in order to encourage participation by some of the lower income countries. Chile, Brazil, and Mexico have all been exploring the possibility of contributing to the trust fund to help some of the other countries attend the meetings and take an active part. Unquestionably, ICA has been very important over the course of all these years. Without ICA's contribution to participation, we would truly be in a much more fragile situation. We would not be present when decisions are made concerning guidelines and standards in Codex. ICA supports the countries of the region so that they can be involved in almost all of the international meetings. This has made a substantial difference in how we work with Codex and how we work with the rest of the countries in this field, with the rest of the world. Development of scientific capacities and scientific contributions. Here too, we have some unfinished business. We are encouraging our scientists to get involved in the auxiliary bodies. We hope also to improve the contribution of data, especially the cacao-producing countries. We need the cacao-producing countries to upload their information, to send it to the auxiliary bodies. All of also their data about cadmium in cocoa. A standard is being developed on cadmium, and if you don't submit your data, it will not be included in the development of the standard, and the standard may not be useful for your countries. The same is true for other situations in which we need scientific data from this region. We need them to be present in the platform where risk analysis is done. We also need to create a scientific network for the Americas. We're working on that. We've been talking to ICA. We hope to continue doing it. The idea is to have a platform where we would be able to take a common stand as we put all of our scientific and technological capability into this work. The other point, we need to promote the development of standards from within the region. We are now working on a sugarcane and sugarcane syrup standard, also quinoa. We're working on bioinputs, that is to develop standards for bioinputs to make agriculture more sustainable. And we are also encouraging the countries to promote new work on fresh fruit and other important subjects. Communication. We've been talking to InfoSan to set up a sub-network within InfoSan for the CC-LAC countries, which is something Africa has. We are identifying and raising awareness among the target audiences in the different parts of the region. And we are also promoting the use of technological platforms and networks in order to reach the general public with information about Codex and about consuming safer food products. In general terms, this is what I wanted to talk to you about. To close, I would like to note that we have made a great deal of progress. As I said before, ICA's support has been critical, and we hope to continue receiving it. We feel that it is also essential for us to improve, to deepen, and to greatly expand our participation, our institutional structures, and our use of science These are the things that will make the difference in the end and will have an impact on the food trade in our region and on the quality of life for our people who consume foods on the market here in this region and worldwide. Thank you. Thank you. Michel?
The presentations we have just heard point to the importance of Codex Alimentarius and the participation of all the member countries of this hemisphere. You mentioned the work that you're doing on bioinsumos and biological inputs, and it strikes me, looking at the back, I see Dr. Pedro Kusianovic standing there, and he's going to convene many of the nations here in a couple of weeks to discuss that. And so it's quite timely, and the whole notion of food safety is something that we all experience on a daily basis. The Codex Committee does a lot of great work, and a lot of it is supported by the government of Canada and the governments of Canada and the United States. And therefore, we're delighted that Canada decided to host this side event. And we thank you for this. And so I'd now like to call on the representative of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, Dr. Brent Wilson, for his comments.
Great.
Dr. Wilson.
Thank you for your kind words. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and speak to you in the context of the IECA Inter-American Board of Agriculture in beautiful Costa Rica. I'd like to begin by congratulating Dr. DaCosta on his recent election as a new chairperson of Codex Alimentarius. I appreciate his comments as well as the informative presentation by Dr. Leoprati Neron. I want to briefly talk about Codex and its important role in supporting Canadian agriculture trade. As you know, Canada is a large country with a relatively small population and very cold winters. We have a trade-oriented economy. We produce a lot of agriculture and food products, but we also import a wide variety of products as well, mostly from IECA members. Canada is the 5th largest producer and importer of agriculture and food products. Over half of our agriculture, our fish and seafood products are exported. So we require for the sustained growth and profitability of the Canadian agriculture sector, we rely heavily on a predictable science-based trading environment. An international trade system which is transparent and founded in regulatory decision-making is key to protecting human health, to supporting the agriculture sector competitiveness, and facilitating access to supplies of food. In this context, we cannot underestimate the role of Codex in setting and promulgating science and risk-based standards. As previously mentioned, with global demand for food expected to rise by 60% to feed 9 billion people over the next 3 decades, coordinated action and collaboration to ensure agriculture and food products reach consumers around the world is becoming more important. At IECA and here, we are all agriculture producers, importers, and exporters. We need to collaborate and support the multilateral institutions, including the World Trade Organization and the international standard-setting bodies, to maintain an open, transparent, and rules-based global marketplace. To ensure that all of our producers are able to compete on a level playing field, Canada, along with other countries, work to promote the development and use of science and risk-based international standards from the international standard-setting bodies. Codex is uniquely placed to address food safety and quality issues, serving as a junction between the FAO, the WHO, and the World Trade Organization. Codex provides a platform to maintain and expand the dialogue and collaboration between scientific experts, regulatory authorities, and trade policy makers. As mentioned previously, Canada greatly benefits from the development and use of Codex science-based international standards. This is why Canada actively supports and participates in this work through supplying technical experts to work within the international standard setting bodies, providing funding to support standard development in important areas, and increasing Canadian engagement and participation in the organization. In January 2017, Canada provided $1 million in discretionary funding to support the work of the international standard setting bodies, mainly in the area of the joint FAO-WHO scientific advice program. We are also in the process right now of reviewing or looking at the potential for additional support this year. The relevance and acceptance of Codex standards and recommendations as the international reference for food safety and quality rest on strong, independent scientific advice from these organizations. Initiatives recently funded by Canada have included a training session for new evaluators for the joint FAO-WHO meeting on pesticide residues, which will be taking place in Ottawa at the end of November. I think at this stage we have 18 trainees and 4 trainers, 2 of them from AICA, 1 from the United States, and 3, I guess. 1 from the United States, 1 from Canada, and 1 from Brazil. We're also funding an extraordinary session of the JMPR meeting in May of 2019. And the purpose of this is to reduce the backlog of pesticide assessments. However, the voluntary contributions to support such initiatives may not be sufficiently sustainable. On this front, Canada is working closely with like-minded countries at the FAO to address the addition of sustainable funding for the Joint Scientific Advice Program over the medium and long term. Ensuring a transparent and open and impartial dialogue is key as Codex addresses emerging issues that have broad implications. And I'm talking or thinking as well with recent issues such as antimicrobial resistance and standards for products of biotechnology, and there are many more. Canada very much values the importance of independence of Codex, where the organization's primary focus is to respond to member needs. We collectively need to acknowledge and support the work that is done by Codex and the FAO-WHO expert bodies that provide the scientific advice necessary to develop these standards. However, currently both at the FAO and WHO, there is a deficit of 1.5 million per year for the scientific advice program. Collectively, we need to seek ways to ensure that the scientific advice program is fully funded in order for them to provide the unbiased scientific advice required for the establishment of international standards. We are all member countries of the FAO, WHO, and Codex. These organizations are only as strong and relevant as the countries that they represent. Many countries adopt Codex standards. Some use Codex as a reference body, but we must work together to ensure the continued credibility and relevance of Codex and to promote the adoption and use of its standards and guidance. Canada will continue to work with you in making Codex a strong, inclusive, and internationally recognized organization that protects human health and facilitates trade. And I thank you very much for allowing us to have this session at your AICA meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Before I open it up to comments, I just wanted to inform you all of some numbers related to ICA's participation with all of you in Codex. We've had 189 technicians from your countries, from 28 of your countries, participate in 30 Codex committees. We've had 50 preparatory video conferences with an average of 12 countries per session to encourage the discussion of topics and proposals prior to Codex committee meetings. We've had 11 Codex colloquia. We host a technical colloquium in the fall and in the spring, and a strategic colloquium where we implement interregional work with Africa. And that is very important because there's only one hemisphere that has an ICA, and that's this hemisphere. And so I know that the governments of our member countries would like to see ICAs in Africa and ICAs in Asia, but they don't exist. And so the work that we've started with Africa and Asia to help those countries have a hemispheric consensus like we have to embrace science, to promote trade, and to promote innovation is very important. We have a twinning program that fosters South-South cooperation with 19 funded programs involving more than 700 participants from 15 beneficiary conferences. And we also have a series of workshops that have involved nearly 500 participants in Paraguay, El Salvador, and Honduras to promote and position Codex before national political authorities and identify national priorities. I think the work that's been done by Codex, by all of you, and by our staff here at Agricultural Health and Food Safety, SIA, under the leadership of Dr. Ahern. I think I see him in the back. Maybe wave or stand up, Rob, so people can see you. And his staff person, the whole staff of SCI, but in particular Eric Bolaños, has been outstanding work, and we applaud them for everything they've done. Rob has, I believe, out in the lobby, a magazine in which he wrote an article for the Global Food Safety Initiative, which brings together food safety professionals from countries and from leading corporations around the world that help trade in food and food products. And one of the initiatives, the goal of this GFSI is to enable a food safety culture. And we all have to have a food safety culture. We all eat, we have to eat. Science is changing that, but I think it's going to take some time. Let's hope. But it's very important. Just the other week, I was flying home, and a young lady from Canada was sitting next to me. And she went on an adventure of a lifetime. But unfortunately, she didn't make it to that adventure because she ate something bad and spent 5 days in the hospital. Well, thank God she lived. But it exemplifies, right there, the importance of food safety. Now, food security is important too, and I know that we're going to move to that. So I don't know how much time we have, Director General, for some comments, but I would open the floor now to comments. But before I close, I just want to thank Canada for hosting this event. I also want to thank the United States government, the USDA in particular, for their sponsorship of CCLAC and for Codex initiatives here in ICA that has enabled the participation of member countries throughout the world. And I mentioned this. So with that, let's open the floor to any comments by member nations, please. Well, I don't see any comments, and that means the issue of food security is overtaking food safety. So I would encourage you all to read the magazine on global food safety. That was an article prepared by Rob that is very thorough, and it's in the lobby, right, Rob? Yes. So with that, oh, here we go. We have a visual. There we go. Outside, Rob, I did my job. Too bad Bryce isn't here because I know he used to lead the Codex initiative at USDA. So with that, Director General, I'll turn it back over to you for announcement on what's next.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I see that our chair is entering the room. I would say that we are now ready for lunch. So I would like to most cordially invite you to join me toward the area where lunch will be served, and that is the lobby downstairs. Because before lunch, we have a brief introduction for you concerning the face of agriculture in the Americas, the art show we have set up downstairs. So please join us as we move downstairs, and I hope you enjoy your lunch.